thewaybackgroup.org. There's got to be more to life than this, right? If you're looking for a more meaningful spiritual discussion, then you've come to the right place. I'm Mark Zaretti, a spiritual teacher and author, and I've got over 25 years of helping other people to get more from their spirituality, forming a deeper and more profound connection on the inside. Now, I'm passionate about freely supporting good spiritual people just like you. And I've created podcasts, guided meditations, videos, feature-length documentaries, books and articles. In the past, I was featured in Natural Health magazine, and I've also appeared on regional BBC radio. As a published author, I already have a number of books in print, and they're all priced not for profit, helping to make spirituality and the guidance that I can offer available to as many people as possible. Since 2017, I've been working on a series of spiritual books, taking a deep dive into interesting facets of spirituality, revealing things that touch on the lives of every single person on the planet, especially those that are spiritually awakening. Now, although these books are still a work in progress, this live show is an opportunity for me to share some of these revelations with you. It's natural that you may be wondering where I'm coming from. I'm not religious, rather I'm spiritual, which is about exploring and understanding the difference between belief and experience. Now, I do have God in my life in a spiritual way, which means it's not bound by the restrictions of a religious belief, but rather is much more of an experiential thing coming from the heart. I'm also pleased to acknowledge Jesus, who is a real inspiration as a spiritual teacher, who talked about the importance of love, forgiveness, compassion, and importantly, truth. So if you've ever wondered, is it possible to have God or Jesus in your life without being religious, then this live show and the work that I do is going to be interesting to you. But in fact, whatever your background and whatever you believe, you'll find this show interesting, thought-provoking, entertaining, sometimes challenging, but most importantly, life-enriching. So let's go on this journey together. So what is the journey that this show's all about? Well, it's a journey to seek the highest truths. Truths that transcend the mundane and the everyday and yet have a real impact on our lives and who we are. Now, I'm going to be drawing on over 40 years of spiritual experience, plus over 25 years of teaching and guiding others. And this show's all about making myself available to answer your questions. And I'll do my best to do so. Every week, people from all kinds of backgrounds are sending me questions, but I'll also be looking at things that are happening in the world around us that are spiritually relevant. And throughout the show, my goal is to share real insights, useful and practical advice and guidance too. But importantly, this show is about you, and this is your chance to get involved, as well as spending time with like-minded spiritual people. Feel free to ask questions about any of the books, podcasts, articles, videos and documentaries that I've done, but more importantly, ask questions about what's going on in your life, what you're noticing, what you're experiencing, because I want to help you. And maybe together we can shed light on matters. So when you go to the website, you can ask questions and there's an option to remain anonymous if you wish. I'm not saying I'm going to have all of the answers, but join me as we dive deeper into the spiritual stuff and at the very least get inspired together. Remember, keep it positive and don't feed the trolls. I want to encourage us all to take this knowledge, this information, but use it with wisdom. Truth is truth, but truth without wisdom is dangerous. Be spiritually wise with it. That truly takes this spiritual discussion into spiritual growth, which is what hopefully this is all about. And we are live. Hello everyone, and it's good to have you all here. We've got Panther 9, Vegan Panda 1975, Millie 2772, we're along with Toshi, and we've also got Marigold and username What. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. And it is the 8th of August 2024. And there was actually an interesting discussion going on in the chat here. So if we look over this way, then we've got the chat on Rumble. And someone was discussing the fact that it's the 8th of the 8th, but if you actually think about the year as well, so it's 2024, so 2 plus 2 is 4, plus 4 is 8, so it's actually the 888 today. And so if you're into numerology, then that may be of interest to you. And we are actually going to be touching on the topic of numerology today as well. So yeah, very interesting time. So 888, welcome to the show. And later on we'll be talking about a different number. But in fact, let's just dive straight into what it is that we're going to be discussing in the show today. So this is actually episode, let's have a look. We are on episode 22. And as you can see here, we've got a picture on the right hand side depicting Jesus and the World Economic Forum, and the word versus between them. So that should give us a bit of a clue as to what we're talking about. But that's partly why this video is titled Good versus Evil. And you can pretty much guess which side represents good in that picture and which side represents potentially represents evil. So without any further ado, let's have a look at what we're going to be discussing, what questions you guys have sent us for the show today. So what have we got coming up today? Well, we've got awakening to the truth of good versus evil in everyday life. Another question on how do I discover my purpose? Someone talking about the fact that they keep seeing the number 333, and a bit of a discussion about what's the deal with veganism. Another kind of leading on from that, I guess, is why are the World Economic Forum pushing insect eating? Then I'm going to share true stories from hospital, and then if we have time we'll get to the question of, are we in a covenant with God? Okay, so some pretty big topics there, I think, and the best way to begin is to dive straight in. So James H asks, hi Mark, thank you for all the shows and the information you provide. It is of great value. Well, thank you. Until recently, I have only ever focused on God and good. However, in the last 6 months or so, I can clearly see the bad at play within this world. The question is, how can I ensure I'm able to see this bad in my everyday life and identify it both on a spiritual and worldly level? So I think it's a very good point. And really what it's talking about is waking up to the fact that we are in duality. Okay, so with I mean, we've talked about this in previous shows, but with the nature of duality, then what we find is that there is good and there is bad. There is hot, there is cold, there is light, and there is dark. And there's something very laudable about saying, you know, I only focus on the good. And I think in terms of what you give your energy to, I would say that that is very worthwhile. And it's a good strategy. But wisdom is that we must also be aware of the bigger picture, the complete picture, if you like. And I'll give you an analogy. So if you are a parent, or just assuming, you know, that you are responsible for someone else who is growing up, and say, for example, they'd led a safe life at home and they get into that age where maybe they're going to go off to university and they're going to you know, be in a new environment away from home. So it wouldn't be kindness to say to them, everything's good, don't worry, everything's all right. You'd want to prepare them for the world and kind of help them to understand that, look, focus on the good, but be wise to the fact that there is negativity and that there could be problems. And being wise to the fact is half the battle. So to go back to the question, which is, you know, how can I ensure that I'm able to see this bad? Just having the intention to be present and awake and going, look, I know that not everyone is good. And, you know, and I did there's a nice short video just talking about that very fact. I know that not everyone is good. So therefore, if I'm going into an environment with different people, then I will be wise, I will sit back, I will be more neutral. I won't necessarily accept what is presented, because one of the things about the nature of what is bad is deception. So in other words, you'll just have a bit more maybe making the intention to be a bit wiser. But in terms of being more spiritual, the more you come from the heart, and I don't mean unconditionally loving in this context, I mean not just being intellectual, because it's very easy to deceive people if they're just purely intellectual, because you just present something on the surface and that's all that the brain really engages with. But your spirit, as a good human, your spirit will be guiding you all the time and giving you information, like saying, look, that person's not very good, or be wary of that person. But if you're in your headspace all the time, I'm pointing to my head, then you're going to miss those cues. So having an intention and being more in the state of neutrality and intending wisdom is a really good way to move forwards. Now, a few people are just saying, we've got a new setup at this end, so a few people are saying that there's a bit of audio lag. So if you bear with me just a moment, I'm going to see if I can resolve that. Bear with me and we will see if this solves the problems. Okay. So if someone could tell me on the chat if that's resolved the audio lag, then that would be really, really good. But we have recently set the software up again, and so it is possible that the settings have changed slightly. So yeah, let me know, guys. But basically, the simple answer to that question is you can't ensure anything, but you can certainly have the intention, and you can put into practice state. So state is always that coming from neutrality, coming from stillness, not necessarily how can I say, it's not accepting what's presented, but at the same time not rejecting it. In other words, just saying, oh, let's see how this unfolds a bit. Just because someone presents themselves as good doesn't mean that they are, but with a bit of wisdom and a bit of time, then that's what we can aim towards. So it's just putting into practice really what we've already learnt. So the other thing is to identify it both on a spiritual level and a worldly level is the second part to that question. So look, on a worldly level, the simple understanding that not everything that presents as good is good. As I've said many, many times, all that glitters is not gold. So we just had a bit of feedback that is still lagging. So let me just try something different and see if we can solve this. Oh, it would have been the wrong number. Let's try this. So I've just made a change. Give it a few minutes, a few seconds, and see if that improves the sync between the audio and the video. I appreciate your patience, guys, as we iron out these little technical things, but hopefully you can hear me, and that's what really matters. So in terms of the spiritual, it's exactly the same, and I've talked at length about this. So for example, when people do things like they try and channel or they try and communicate with higher things, there's a kind of a broad belief out there that anything that you communicate with on higher dimensions must be good, and it isn't. It's exactly the same. And so it's that kind of like, just because you wouldn't go down the street and just trust everyone that you meet in exactly the same way. There has to be a little bit of discernment. Now there's something that what a lot of people don't understand is those that are good generally on higher dimensions won't interfere in the affairs on the third dimension. So they're not reaching out to communicate with you. They're not trying to guide you in an interactive way. Anything that is instigating communication on a higher dimension, generally speaking, is more than likely trying to mislead you. So again, that's just a little bit of wisdom that comes from experience. And so, again, if you feel that you're being guided in an unrequited way by something other than yourself, then I would always be very suspicious of that. So we can come back to this question, but kind of at a top level, it just comes down to intention and state. So let's have a look at the next question. So James also asks a second part. So first of all, there's a bit of an explanation, a bit of context. So this next question is a very personal question, which I do believe I already know the answer to. Since an early age, I've always known that I was different to most people. When I discovered spirituality, within minutes I had grasped on an intellectual level the core principles. I suddenly knew who I was, where I belonged, how I got here, among many other questions that instantly got answered. Of course, this was only the very beginning of a journey that consumed every aspect of my life. I knew where my home had always been and would always be. Now, after many years of spiritual growth, through prayer, meditation, introspection, contemplation, not to say I'm perfect, I make mistakes, but I learn fast. God works quickly within me nowadays. I am beginning to ask how I find my purpose. I know I have one, I know it's spiritual, and I know that I'm here to serve God and make this world a little better. My question is, how do I find that purpose? My own answer is, it will come to me when I am ready, and it will be bright, and I will know it is for me. Any help or advice is much appreciated. Thank you, and God bless. James. So first of all, thank you, James. Whenever someone takes the time to be open about what they're going through and what they're experiencing from a spiritual point of view, I think we always have to be very respectful of that. And there is a lot of good and truth in what has been written, but there are also things that if this person wishes to move forwards, they need to, well, they don't need to do anything, but they have the opportunity to learn from and reflect on, because otherwise there is a certain amount of belief and ideas that actually may be holding them back. So I made a few changes, by the way, so if the audio and the video is synced up, do let me know in the chat. But if either way, I will crack on. So there are a few things in here, and I wonder how many of us listening, whether you're listening now or on a podcast, can identify with the first statement that since an early age I've always known that I was different to most people. That's actually very common. And that's not because, generally speaking, we are different. It's because we're becoming aware of our brain, or our brain's becoming self-aware. And the sense that it's important for our maturation and our functioning that we become self-aware, because it's all about the self being the vehicle through which we learn. Okay, so part of that is realizing I am not the same as others, and the other side of that coin is I am different. Now, what can happen is that becomes I am special. And we talked in the previous episode about where does ego come from, and how as we become a bit older, certainly moving into adolescence, that there is this natural tendency that ego starts to form. And so if it's left unchecked, that I know that I was different to most people, could become I feel I am special, and that could then stoke the flames of ego. Okay, not that that's what's being said here, but just just kind of highlight how all of this ties in, especially with what we've discussed in the past. So the next thing is that I grasped on an intellectual level the core principles, and that looking into it is absolutely true, because it was just as it's the brain that is the part that's saying I know I'm different, it's the brain that did the grasping, so it was intellectual. And that's why it's suddenly I knew who I was, where I belonged, how I got here, among many other questions that instantly got answered. It's all about questions and answers and information. It's not about state. But that's a very reassuring place for the brain to be. So for anyone that goes through that arc, it's a really nice place to be, because you suddenly feel like pieces of the puzzle are dropping into place, that I now know a lot more about who I am. Okay, but that who I am is very much the intellectual sense of identity. And of course, this was only the very beginning of a journey that consumed every aspect of my life. They say I knew where my home had always been and would always be. So knowing is not the same as being, and that's where I kind of say that to inspire that intellectually knowing is not the same as having actually had the state of being one thing everywhere. And that includes not being the brain, not being the intellectual, not being the sense of self. And so there is always that looking up rather than being that which is looked at, if that makes sense. So now, after many years of spiritual growth through prayer, meditation and introspection and contemplation, which are all very good things, not to say I'm perfect, I make mistakes, well, congratulations, we all do. So that's a good thing to acknowledge. And that will always carry on, because the environment we're in is always changing, and we are always changing. So even if we think we've got it sorted, we're going to hit something new. We're going to hit a challenge. And, even today I had that, and I had to kind of take myself away from the situation, re-center myself, apologize where I had lost my neutrality and been basically tugged at by the situation. And so, that's always going to happen. But if we can increase the amount of time between the times we stumble and fall, and if we can maintain state for longer and longer periods, and that's the best that we can hope for down here in our physical forms. So a little bit of compassion and not setting unrealistic expectations goes a long way. So I learn fast, and God works quickly within me nowadays. So I looked into that, and it's not that God is working in the person, and that's not how it works. It's more that the more that person is aligned with what they know to be good, then they are, because remember, God is the source of all that is good. So the more that we live a good life, then the more we are aligned with God and goodliness. But it doesn't mean that God is working through you, because for God to work would be an action, and that may well become more relevant as we go into some of the later questions in this show. So, and I pick it up just to kind of say that truth matters, and the better we understand things, then we don't get caught up, because what if someone kept on identifying with God working through me, then what they're actually doing is it's themselves on the inside communicating with them, saying, oh, you're doing a good job, or that's right, etc. And so they start deifying their own sense of self. And that's actually quite risky, because think about it, where's that going to lead? So then we go on, but I learn fast. So I'm beginning to ask how I find my purpose. I know I have one, I know it's spiritual, and I know that I'm here to serve God and make this world a little better. And then they say, so how do I find my purpose? So this is where I'm going to talk to all of us, okay? So if you imagine your physical body, it's got lots of different cells. You've got brain cells and muscle cells and red blood cells carrying oxygen, and white blood cells acting as your immune system, and bone marrow cells producing red blood cells, and kidney cells and heart cells, and all these different differentiated cells. Now, they already are doing what they need to do. That's why they are who they are. And if you think about humanity as like a whole organism, then who you are is who you are. And your purpose is to be you, okay? So you've been given a certain personality, and you've been given a choice. And the choice is simple. Do you be good, or do you be bad? That's fundamentally the choice, because every choice that you could make either takes you closer to God, good, or away from God, bad, keeping things really, really simple. So you, wherever you are, whoever you are, however you are, whether you're male, female, young, old, in England or somewhere else, have choices. And it's that simple. Your purpose is to be the best version of you. The end result is that if you make choices that are good, then the end result is that you make the world a better place, which is what's being referenced in the question. So I've got to make this world a little better, okay? So, but it isn't how do I make this world a little better? It's what are the right choices for me in the situation I'm in, based on who I am. Now, the idea, how do I find my purpose, does not have its roots in spirituality. It actually goes back to what I said right at the start, that the brain that says I am different can start to believe I am special. Then it's looking for how to be special. If it's looking for how to be special, then it's looking for purpose, because it's not accepting who and what it is now. It's saying something is missing. I need to find my purpose. But you already have your purpose. You are that cell in that body that is meant to be who you are. And your purpose is to make good choices. You're like a choice machine. The environment you're in will become better because you make good choices, good being good as in godly. And this is why all morals fundamentally come from God, not from society, because anything could be said, well, it's, the Spartans used to say it's good to die in battle or whatever, but that's not necessarily spiritual truth. So truth leads to justice, and justice defines what is good. So if you are being spiritual, then you already are fulfilling your purpose. If you are looking for your purpose, then you're not being spiritual, you're being intellectual about spirituality. So the question points to attention, and whether it's recognized or not, it's the seeking a purpose that is seeking to be special. Now, it is true that occasionally there is some kind of divine mandate for an individual, okay? And Jesus notwithstanding, because he was a bit different if you look at the entire history of humanity, then all those who have been, quote unquote, called upon to serve God were guided to it. They didn't want it, they didn't ask for it, they didn't seek it. They were the right person in the right place. They were the path of least resistance, and they were called on. And you could count them on, well, there are less than 10 in the entire history of humanity, not including Jesus. So for any one of us to be saying, well, I'm looking for my purpose, or I'm seeking my purpose, is the opposite, because those people weren't called on because they were looking to be called on. They were called on because they were the path of least resistance to achieve what needed to be achieved, and they were able to be guided because they were already listening to their spirit, listening to their soul, and therefore the harmonious channels of communication were already in place, and so they could be of service when it was needed. So, and kind of turning that question upside around a bit and saying, actually, that's the wrong approach. It's an intellectual approach, and it's holding you back. You are already who you are, and it's the choices that you make that are fulfilling your potential. And sometimes we think, but we're not doing anything great. Well, if you took one brick out of a wall, the wall could fall down, but that one brick thinks, I'm not doing anything, I'm just sat here, surrounded by other bricks that all look the same. Yeah, to the perspective of the brick, but to the perspective of the wall, that one brick could be the linchpin, that one brick could be supporting most of the weight. And you take it out and the integrity of the entire environment falls. So we're not necessarily here to, what's the phraseology? It will come when I'm ready, and it will be bright, and I will know it is for me. It might not be bright, it's already there, and you might not know it's for you because it's not for you, it is you. So the brick doesn't try and shine, it just does the best job of being a brick, if that makes sense. So it's not to negate it. I think it's wonderful to have the aspiration to be of service, but understand that being of service means simply that you are making good choices. And it's that simple, it's that easy. Okay, so let's have a look at the next question. Right, so now the next question is from JB, who's we've not had JB on the show before, so welcome JB, it's good to have you on the show. And first he gives us a bit of a message. So, hello Mark, I've really been enjoying your live shows. A friend directed me to them, suggesting that I might find them beneficial. I had been caught up in the negative energy of conspiracies and felt that it was taking a toll on me, so I really appreciated listening to your shows and the positive guidance you provide. I have a lot of questions to ask you, but I will stick to a couple for now and have recently been on my mind. Apologies if you have already covered these questions or similar topics. I'm still working my way through all the previous episodes. So in particular, I've written episode 15 at the top because I think what he's referring to is that he'd been pulled up, he'd been kind of caught up in the negative energy of conspiracies. I talked a lot about that in episode 15 and how it's not to deny the conspiracies, but to make sure that we don't end up becoming negative and spiraling into that negativity because of giving too much attention to conspiracies. So that's nice to realise that that show may have helped someone. And so his first question is, I would like to ask about numbers. I keep seeing the numbers 33 and 333. For example, I often find myself looking at the clock and see 3:33. What is the significance of repeatedly seeing the same numbers? Now, I've put a kind of thumbnail there to episode 7, because in episode 7 I do talk about numerology, but I kind of caution against it. Now, I actually had to do a little bit of work on this question to look into it. I had a hunch, but it took a bit of digging around. And as an aside, I did a podcast once about warning people about the laws of manifestation and the teachings of Abraham and stuff like this. And this kind of ties into that. When someone has that kind of phenomena where they're regularly seeing the same number, it's like it just jumps out, like you might see 1212 every time, or 2020 or 33. So, there is significance, but it's not actually good. Okay, and in particular 333. Okay, so if you were thinking about, for example, 6 minutes past 7, then that would actually be the 6th hour and 66 minutes. Okay, but that doesn't make sense to people. So what's half of that? 333. In other words, it's not good, it's negative. And what's happened with this individual, and this happens to a lot of people, is, and it's good that they've noticed it, but the reason they're noticing it is because it's been put in them. So we've got a brain, okay? We're like a computer, and we're supposed to be reading our environment, making decisions and acting, and then the internal dialogue is supposed to be our own. It's supposed to be our own thoughts, our own internal conversations. But unfortunately, that which is dark, and people give these things names like Satan and stuff, but that which is dark, a long, long time ago, well, I won't go into it here, but I do discuss this in the books I'm writing, but learn how to put ideas into people. Okay, I'll keep it really simple. And one of the things they do is they put these kinds of ideas into people, like, you will notice this number. And the idea is that if someone is actually starting to spiritually awaken, they don't want that person to start to look inside and kind of connect with their spirit and their soul and come from a place of love. They want them in the world, and they want them distracted by the world. And so one of the big kind of distractions for people who are spiritually seeking is to kind of take that enthusiasm and divert it off into things like numerology, geometry, magic, etc. And so that, the enemy, those that want to keep you in the dark, will know you well, because your mind, your brain is like an open book to them. They can read it. And so they'll go, well, this person is likely to perhaps be drawn towards numerology. So they put the idea of numerology into you, and then they start manifesting it in the world around you. Now, the thing is, the clock always says 333 at least twice a day. But the reason why you're noticing it is because you've now been programmed to notice it. And so the idea from their perspective is, let's get this person hooked on the idea that numbers have significance. Then we can maybe put another program or an idea into them that they should look into the teachings of Abraham, or, the law of manifestation, or numerology for those kinds of things. And then that person will just get caught up in all of that interest, intrigue. And it is, people can spend a lifetime looking into it, but it's not spirituality. And the whole point is, the good news is that this person is obviously becoming spiritually awake, or else the enemy, quote unquote, wouldn't have invested in trying to put these distracting ideas into them. And so that's actually why, good spiritual people will start to see things like, I keep seeing 111 or 333. And 333, the clue is there, it's half of 666. It's deliberately chosen. It's almost like, those that are dark, we talk about the Olympic ceremony again another time, but I'll put a link to the stuff I did on that. But those that are dark love to flaunt in your face the truth, but always slightly twisted. So 333 is half of 666. And that's where that's coming from. So, if I'm doing work with someone like that and they know me well, then if they inform me of this stuff, then I would just clear these ideas out from them, because it's just kind of, think about it, it's just thought and energy. And if you're experiencing it, then don't give it energy, don't give it your time, ignore it, have the intention that all these nonsense ideas and thoughts are banished from me. That's kind of what you can do from your perspective. But it's fascinating stuff, and I'm really grateful to JB for answering that question, for asking that question, because it allowed me to look into it, and I discovered this particular way that these things are interfering with good people. So, now we know this is something that I can potentially help people with in the future. So a few more people have joined on the chat, and it's good to have you all joining us. So let's have a look at the next question. But at this point, what I'm going to say is that those on YouTube, before we dive into the next question, we're going to say goodbye to YouTube. I've put a link in the YouTube chat, so if you want to jump over to the Rumble and carry on, then please do so. But to discuss what we're going to discuss next, YouTube unfortunately isn't what we would call free speech friendly, and so at this point we're going to switch off the YouTube stream, and I'll see you guys over on YouTube, on Rumble. But thank you for joining us on YouTube, and I'll see you over on Rumble.